I'm going to take you through a little bit about thinking of collaborative research. So we are very research active at GOSH and UCL as well as at the Evelina and many of the centres that you represent. So I'm going to talk a little bit about an introduction into how we physically go through research. So I'm going to start with a few slides, show you a little bit of involvement, and then we can kind of open it up to the floor. So this happened over dinner last night, and then after dinner last night. Always think about what is your question? What is your hypothesis? And how can you answer the question that you can't answer today? What is it you need to know tomorrow? And obviously your research may be laboratory, may be translational, thinking about how you bring science in, or you can have clinical research going on to looking at data, registry data, which we talked about yesterday, as well as some of the importance, obviously, of audit and quality improvement as well. So what I tell people is you need to think of your hypothesis like a sandwich. There's no lunch today, so I'm just getting you all hungry. And the things you need to think about are when, I believe, and because. So this is a prediction of what you think will happen when you're going to consider what your experiment is. And this may be looking at what available evidence there is in the literature, what previous research. So as we were there last night having our course dinner, putting a little bit of salt on our food. So I thought I would use salt, since we all love it as nephrologists, or do not love it as nephrologists. So when salt is added to the bubble solution, I believe the bubbles will be much weaker than without salt, because salt breaks down the glycerin that helps form the bubbles. So you've got a hypothesis, you're thinking about when something happens, what you believe from the information that you know, and why that is. So what, because of what. So ask your question, gather your research together to try and answer your question, look at what's in the literature, what evidence do we have. Make sure that you look through all of Professor Flynn's Pediatric Nephrology from volume 1, and then write your hypothesis, but go back to it. Keep on rethinking about how you can improve your hypothesis and then create a null hypothesis, which again we'll talk about. So that's the background, what I wanted to lay into your brains as you're thinking about what questions you want to get. And what I'm going to do here a little bit is talk about understanding the process of research. You heard from Wes just now. It's really important to have patient and public involvement, engagement and participation. Especially in the United Kingdom, you cannot get a grant if you have not thought your PPIE section really is strong as it can be. If you don't have your patients and your public with you, you will not get funding. Even if you think you've asked a few of your patients, how can you demonstrate it? And then I'll talk a little bit about the clinical research facility at GOSH, which is funded by the National Institute for Health and Care Research, where we've got a biomedical research centre, but also a physical clinical research facility, which you're all more than welcome to come and visit. But we will be moving to new premises right next to our nephrology ward in February 2024. So what I'm going to talk about is highlighting the importance that every bit of research is important. So when you do your animal work, yes, you can't say what's going to happen in humans, but it's interesting to know what your hypothesis is. But remember that children are not small adults, so what happens in your first trials in adults may not happen in children. Think about, actually, as you heard about earlier, it's really quite important to get your questionnaires out, to get your background and understanding of the information from clinicians and members of the multidisciplinary team. But of course, a lot of the work that we do is independent research, like Wes just said, and going for funding from NIHR, Wellcome, MRC, Kidney Research UK, or whatever local, national, international collaborations. We won't talk about Brexit, but mention that we can apply for Horizon 2020 in the UK, which we're all very happy about now. But obviously, a huge amount of work is pharma-sponsored. And these pharma studies, commercial studies, do have a role, and they really are important to answer those questions with companies. But remember that their agenda may be very different from yours as the principal and chief investigator. So you have a national chief investigator for every country, and a principal investigator is the person leading the study in your site. So you start off with an idea, and that idea you need to focus, but you then need to actually work out, where could I get money to do this? And actually, when we consider where to get money, sometimes some of the charities are now actually asking for your views. So they will put a call out to say, what potentially could you suggest as a grant round that we might come up with in the future? And therefore you write an idea that you want to know, what's the incidence of dementia in adults who were children that had a kidney transplant. That's quite niche, but if all of a sudden they write a study about the grant says neurological diseases and kidney diseases, it's because they've listened to what you're interested in. So sometimes you can actually help the funding bodies get that grant process to what you want. Always make sure you get all your approvals beforehand, and that you submit it online. I won't mention any names, but I was submitting a £5 million grant with NIHR. I devolved responsibilities because the web pages allowed you to someone else. And I said, can we submit it the night before? And they said, yep, just a few more changes I need to do. And I said, well, I'm in clinic. So I phoned in the morning and I said, I'm in clinic till 1 o'clock. And the grant submission is 1 o'clock. And they said, don't worry, it's fine. I had a missed call at 12:58, which was that they realized that that person couldn't actually press the submit button, but I needed to press the submit button. And of course, I walked past, or rather ran past, about 20 computers from clinic to my office, because as everybody who works at Gosh knows, it takes about 4 hours for you to log on to a computer that you've not logged on to. And so I had to run to my room. I managed to submit at 12:59 and 59. I waited furiously for that email to come back that they'd received the application. And I kept on thinking, oh, it's not my fault. And then I was thinking, actually, it is my fault. If I couldn't apply for that money, it's my fault. You can't blame other people, even if you've devolved responsibility. So find out about what funding opportunities they are. Think about, actually, sometimes if there is a different call, can you morph your idea into something else which will fit into that call? Make sure that you're completely eligible to apply. If you're applying for a PhD studentship, do you have the regulatory requirements beforehand, which may be things such as your GCP, where you did your medical school, which university that you're going to be actually doing your further study. But it's all about teamwork, and that's the reason that I love research. It's about getting everybody together, sharing ideas, exchanging ideas, but basically sometimes actually getting inspiration, coming to meetings like this that we've got today. There obviously will be different things that happen in your each individual countries, never mind your each individual organisations. And we now have a national framework here for Research Ethics Committee approval on the IRAS form, My Research Projects website. But still, you will find, for example, a drug company's got a particular drug that they want to investigate in 2 different conditions, like C3 glomerulopathy and vasculitis, and they apply to use this in 12 to 60-year-olds, so they're including children, and it goes through 2 different committees. One says you can't give it to children because there's not enough data, and the other committee says it's fine. Well, that's just a personal opinion, and that's something you sometimes have to just waive. So just to let you know what we've got. So at Gosh, we've got the Young Persons Advisory Group. We've actually had some of our transplant recipients go through this. And these are children and young people who hold regular surgeries on a Saturday morning that can talk you through your grant submission that you're thinking about. They can tailor make, they can help you with some of your PIS, or your patient and parent information sheets as well. And this is part of YPAG. It's made up of 6 groups around England. It's expanding. They give you constructive comments on your proposals, but obviously it's great for when you're putting in your proposal. And we have the technology, hopefully. So I think the best thing to do is to show you what patients actually think. Oh, try again. Can you all hear okay?
Hello and welcome to this Generation R News. In this episode, Scary Labs, Mythbuster Freya tracks down a research nurse to investigate what takes place here. Research nurse Amy chats to some patients who are on a clinical research trial. Mythbuster Esme asks Chief Executive Peter Steer, would you allow your children to take part?
Thank you, Peter, for joining us. Do patients and families get the choice whether to take part in trials?
Absolutely. Engagement from the parents or the patient is always completely optional, and it's important we take a lot of trouble to make sure we get consent, but also informed consent so people really understand exactly what they're engaging in.
Why are research trials involving young people so important?
And children's diseases are often different diseases than adults get. Even when they're the same disease, the disease in children happens when children and young people are growing and developing, a very, very different effect often. So it's critical that we understand the effects of those diseases, how it affects children, leads to better understanding, better treatments, and hopefully cures.
What is the role of staff in making Gosh a research hospital?
I mean, staff are critical, all staff. We're trying to build a culture here, and I think everybody from the administrative staff that you see in outpatients or on a ward, their awareness of the research, their ability to be reassuring about it, about patients and families' engagement, right through to the nurses and doctors and allied health who might design the study and be taking part in the study. All very, very important that they understand that their contribution is going to make a difference, not just to engaging patients and families, but their confidence in research being an integral part of their future and the future well-being of children and generations to come.
How would you feel about your child taking part in research?
I'm very proud, I think. This sort of research makes a difference, not just to the patients involved, hopefully, but often future generations. And again, not just here, but across the world. It's great to be able to contribute to that. I'd be very proud.
Thank you, Esme and Peter. We now take you to Mythbuster Freya, finding out more.
Hi, thanks for talking with us. I want to know what goes on here.
My role as a research nurse is to help support the children and families in studies when they've chosen to take part. So these studies might be anything from learning more about the child's condition, testing new diagnostic methods, or possibly looking at new treatments altogether.
And we're here to help children take part safely in research. We work with the nurse or the doctor who's running the research to make sure that the plan is followed exactly to the letter. Children who are taking part in research have contact with the research team and the clinical team, and it's this collaboration that helps to make research really successful here.
People worry that crazy experiments happen here. Is that true?
Not at all. I totally admit it does sound scary at first, but in a survey recently done here at the hospital, 90% of parents actually welcome the opportunity to hear about research that their children could be involved in. We only do research that has the potential to benefit the children or other children with similar conditions. And research is very heavily governed by lots of legal and national regulations. In fact, those regulations are really strict, and that's only a good thing because it's always got to be safety first.
It's really important also to remember that it's completely voluntary whether children take part, and we're here to check at each stage that children and families are happy to continue taking part in research. One thing we really enjoy is seeing how many children volunteer to take part in the studies, not to just improve their healthcare, but to also improve the healthcare of others and for the children of the future as well. It's really inspiring to see.
Thanks for chatting with us today. Back to you, Nikki.
That was Freya reporting from Eagle Ward on what really goes on. And finally, research nurse Amy chats to patients Lottie and Ashley.
Why are you taking part in a clinical research trial?
I'm taking part because my mum mentioned it, and so did my doctor. They said it would help my legs up better than the other medicine that we had.
And what's it like taking part in a trial?
It's fun because there's play nurses, all the nurses are nice. You can do painting, you can do modelling, you can go on computers. They have loads of fun things, so it's actually quite fun.
How does it feel to help other children like you?
I'm not only helping myself at the same time, I'm helping loads of other different people, like my sister and my cousins, and it just feels good to help other people. It feels good because I have a younger sister and 2 cousins who have the same condition, and they could get the medicine if it goes out.
What would you say to people who are trying to put you off taking part in the trial?
It's helping, it's not doing anything bad. The other medicine wasn't great, and I don't get aches and pains anymore.
Great to see the life-changing work that goes on and some of those crazy myths busted. Thanks for watching Generation R News. Young people improving health through research.
So that just gives you a flavour from the children's perspective, and I think that's the reason that we all do what we do, is for the kids, but actually research can improve the lives, not necessarily of the patients that are in the trials, because of course they make it not randomised to the intervention, or the intervention actually may not be proven to be effective, may in fact not be as safe as we thought. But it's really important part of the work that we do to try and improve things. So as I said, I'm the director of our research facility, so if anybody wants to come and have a look, we're moving into our new wing in February. Now I've got other slides, but I think with time constraints, it's probably good to open the floor up if anybody's got any other ideas. Claire, I can see, has got lots of good ideas. I love playing the piano, so I love the name piano as well. You have to come up with these wacky names, don't you, Wes, like Pluto and Limits, and sit and work out whether your acronyms work out, like atomic access to transplantation and transplant outcome measures in children. But happy to open the floor up, and if anybody wants to share some ideas, we can collaborate in this very room. Anybody got anything they want to ask or to say? Don't be shy. Now's your time. Jelna. Oh, you're not shy.
No. Thanks, Steve. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed, and I think it happened that you are chairing the session, but you failed to mention that you are director of the clinical research facility as well. So well done on all this work. My question is really thinking about, we talk about collaboration and research, and for children, if you're taking prospective trials, you know, what do you think about the obstacles in different countries when it comes to the law and when it comes to their research regulations, you know, and how much needs to be done in that ways to maybe facilitate more of international collaboration? Or do you find it being involved in international trials that's maybe not as much of a problem as it could be?
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting question, and obviously we've been involved in many randomized controlled trials internationally. The regulations do differ from place to place. We have a huge bureaucratic system, as you heard there, in England and in United Kingdom. So we've got a big thing about GDPR and information and how much information goes. So, for example, one of the studies I'm involved in, which is being led by America, they're very happy to have pseudonymized data, but our ethics want it to be fully anonymized, which means that I therefore don't know if somebody comes back. It's about tracing that individual patient, because I've got to be completely blinded to knowing what their treatment is and what's happened. So we definitely do see differences from country to country, and also interpretation. So if you're doing a commercial study, it's different because the sponsor is likely to be the pharma company. And for example, you may ask them about a particular issue which may be more important in your country, for which you need to be more specific in the information. And each time that they have people working on this or going for resubmissions back to the ethics or MHRA, it costs them money because they need people to work on this, and sometimes they just aren't interested. So there was one study where it was a randomized controlled trial for immunosuppression in pediatric kidney transplant recipients, and the child was 15 and a half. And many countries will have a discussions about when can you consent, when can you assent. So do you need the parental or legal guardian signature as well as the child? If you look and see whether they're Gaelic competent, in most places it's like 16, and then as soon as you turn 16, you need the young person to sign the consent form. And I looked at the protocol and it didn't mention anything. And I basically said, well, this patient will not be able to sign the protocol and to sign the consent form when they're 16 and 6 months, but I want them in the study because they're happy, the parents happy, and the company said, absolutely, that's fine. Patient turned 16, there was a new monitor that came in and said, you need to reconsent this patient. I said, well, I've already had this discussion with the sponsor and we were told we can't. And the company basically turned around and said, well, actually, we don't want to go back to ethics. It's too much work to just do it for the United Kingdom. So we had to withdraw the patient. So we had to have a discussion about whether the investigational medicinal product we could give on the NHS as opposed to being in with the trial, or whether the company would give it. And in the end, the company decided that they would actually give it if the parent was happy, but they couldn't be in the trial. So there's all those logistic bits. And I think you're right that it's very difficult as an investigator to know what's going to happen in another country unless you speak to another chief investigator, principal investigator of the other company and find out if there are different laws and regulations. So for one of the studies involved in the United States of America, they have told me that their person that can help with ethics submission is not allowed to help in Europe because that's what their institution has said. It's not a written law, but it's what's happened within their institution that they've. So you find out all of these things as you go down that pathway. So you're right that doing international studies is more tricky, and even though you think you know and you learn, it very often is different. And we're definitely finding with commercial sponsored, so pharma trials, that in the olden days they would open up to say 6 sites in the UK. And now they're actually maybe doing just 1 or 2 sites because it costs so much more money to get the regulations approved. So we're also finding that we've got studies where they're not opening in certain countries in Europe, but and Wes has been involved in some where can we bring patients and can they be treated in the NHS for research, or are they also able to have NHS care emergency? So there is a whole regulatory process that you've got to basically stipulate very clearly before you take on patients. So it is not easy. Wes?
I completely agree, and I've experienced a lot of those frustrations firsthand. But I think the flip side of that is that, if we really believe that this research is worth doing for our patients, you and I both believe that we should fight and look to solve those issues. There's always barriers that come up. Yeah. In laboratory research, in clinical research, and translational research, you will always face frustrating barriers, whatever your area of research and whatever level of translation it is. But if you believe your research is worth doing for your patients, it just takes tenacity to keep going at it, go at it at a different angle, speak to somebody else, find a difference. So you just have to keep going and ploughing on and knock that barrier down, and somehow you will be able to knock it down. But you will always face barriers. You just have to be tenacious. Yeah,
and I think it's about, as you said, about how you answer the question. So I've got a patient at the moment who's not under my care, but my role in the CRF I'm overseeing, who's in a phase 1 clinical trial. There's ways of monitoring the patients and their assessment of their neurological status. And this patient has done very well in this investigational medicinal product. But the study results do not show statistically significant improvement. And we're now in the situation that NICE will not approve but you've got a parent who says, my child, this is what they were like when they were 16, this is what they're like when they're 18. They have hugely improved. And there was a period of time where there was access to the drug issue. So they saw the child deteriorate because we couldn't get the drug as part of their next infusion. It's intrathecal dosing, which goes directly into the brain. And this takes a whole nurse and a whole doctor to give an infusion every two weeks. Yet I can't find an adult hospital that's willing to do this. And it's really difficult for families. And as you said, we're looking to make sure, is there anything that we can do? Can we continue to give the drug at our institution? And then produces all the ethics and discussions about, what are we able to actually achieve in a National Health Service? But I'm still battling. So some questions we don't actually come to the end of. And it's difficult. As you said, when you do clinical trials and you don't get your p-value of 0.05, we're kind of fixated on that. But sometimes it's about, is there another way to interpret the data to try and get your message across that for an individual patient there can be a benefit, but for actually a cohort of 100 patients, it may not be cost effective, or it may not be as efficacious as we want. And that's happened, as you know, recently with, there's a big movement in the UK for cystic fibrosis. Most of the children are on these new agents to prevent them getting infections, and NICE have just come back and said we're not improving the latest drug, and there's a complete uproar from the patient and parent body. So actually that may make amends and change how things are done, but it is tricky.
Joseph, can I ask you, how about in the United States? How do you guys do your multi-center trials?
Well, I think the process is similar, and there's obviously a difference between investigator-initiated and sponsored by a company, and then even a difference with, a collaborative group, an existing collaborative group that sponsors the study. And, but I think, all that's very well and good, but the most important thing is that, we're dealing, I don't have to tell you all this, but these are, even in big centers like ours, these are uncommon conditions, and you need multiple centers to have the sufficient numbers to answer the question. And, the barriers are just finding the funding and finding the way to bring the investigators all together to develop the right kind of, approach. The biggest trouble, we have some of the same issues with industry trials, where they come to you with a protocol that's done, and they may or may not have consulted with someone who's familiar with treating that condition in children, or they may have someone internal who took care of children 20 years ago but doesn't any longer. And you're faced with a protocol that is totally impractical. Like I'm involved in a clinical trial of a drug that's given to dialysis patients, and they want dialysis patients under the age of 9, but they won't allow the investigational product, which is a liquid, to be given through a gastrostomy. And so I'm like, well, I have 5 patients who could qualify for your trial, but I have all of them get all of their medicines, all of their food through gastrostomy. So, go on to the next site. Mm-hmm. So it's things like that come up, and it's very hard to then get the sponsors to change the protocols later.
So I remember once I was at a meeting to discuss a randomized controlled trial, which we've now done for immunosuppression in pediatric kidney transplant recipients. And I put my hand up and I went, I think you're potentially giving too much immunosuppression to absolutely all your patients, so it includes your low risk. And I was the only voice in about 50 pediatric nephrologists, and I walked out and I'm having coffee, and I basically spoke to people and said, well, what do you think? He said, oh no, I agree with you. I said, but you didn't say anything. Anyway, the trial ran. I said, I'm not part of it. I said, I don't believe in it. And after a year of being able to recruit, they changed the protocol. And, sometimes I think we can influence, but you've got to do it together as pediatric nephrologists or transplant surgeons, as teams, to try and get the best regimen. So I think you're right that it is difficult, but sometimes we just have to mold the commercial companies to doing the study that we want.
And we really want these drugs studied in children, right? And we want them labeled for use in children. Like we were just talking about antihypertensives yesterday, and why don't we use Ramipril in the United States? Because it failed the trial. Mm-hmm. It was a poorly designed trial, and so the FDA won't label it for children. Yep. So we use other ACE inhibitors. So you have to really work with companies, and I used to do this. I don't do it any longer in terms of consulting with companies on trial design. They need our input. They need to, and they also need to listen to us when they're making these trials, because we want to have the drugs available for our patients.
And I always tell people that, for example, the two biggest studies using the drug that we discovered, because a lot of patients have a rituximab deficiency. Have you seen those patients? They come to your clinic and they've never had rituximab. There's a few of them, but if you give them an infusion, it improves. But no, seriously, for systemic lupus erythematosus and lupus nephritis, the Explorer in the LUNAR trial showed in adults that actually it failed to meet the primary endpoint, but yet it is still given, and it's the commonest drug because everybody knows of the failings of the study. So the design of your study has got to be crystal clear. You've got to make sure you're asking the right question, you're going to get the right patients, and that your methods of measuring a difference are going to be valid. So for example, if you're giving too much drug, then actually adding in another drug, is it going to show a statistically significant difference? Any other comments?